Welcome, I'm Tony, and in this video I'm going to be sharing my table saw setup with you. It's different, so if you like different, you'll probably enjoy this. The main thing I'm doing here that you probably haven't seen before is using a second table saw in order to maximize my cut capacity. This is a process that I like to call doubling down. Just about everything on my table saw station has been mothered by necessity. Back several years ago when I first started building cabinets here in my garage, I was dead set on getting a 3 horsepower cabinet saw, and the plan was to just use my job site table saw until I got the bigger saw. What I didn't expect is after implementing some of these creative additions that my job site table saw setup would become so comfortable that I rarely think about the bigger saw, or at least I don't think about it nearly as often as I used to. So when it comes to using a smaller saw for cabinet work, there are some disadvantages. One of them is the lack of power, and the other one is the lack of cut capacity. The workaround for the lack of power has been to use smaller blades. I almost exclusively use 7 1/4 inch blades. The thickness or the kerf on a 7 1/4 inch blade is around 1/16 of an inch versus the 3/32 to 1/8 of an inch kerf found on 10-inch blades. This is going to put a lot less strain on the little saw in order to make the same cuts. The other thing is, because it's removing about half of the material, it's going to create about half of the dust. So a lot of pluses to using the smaller blade and the smaller saw. About the only disadvantage is that the maximum depth of cut is about 1.5 inches, which really isn't that big a deal with cabinet work because the majority of the material is about 3/4 of an inch or less. The other thing is the lack of cut capacity, and this is where I had to get creative. The first thing that I did that sort of worked was clamped a straight edge to the left side of the saw and then slid the saw itself to the right. There were several issues with this idea. One of them is as soon as I pulled the saw out from under the over-the-top dust extraction, it didn't work anymore. And the other one was that it was rare that I could actually stack up all my big cuts to happen at the same time. So it was more likely that I was going to have to flip from big cut to little cut, and that meant that I was going to have to keep taking this clamped fence on and off, which was very cumbersome. The other thing was cutting on the left side of the blade is super weird. So it's probably like driving on the opposite side of the road. Say you go to another country where they drive on the other side of the road. It's not that you couldn't get used to it, it's just weird. So the other thing is flopping back and forth from one side to the other. It was just something that I never could get used to. The reason that I mention this idea is because sliding the saw is something that I use when I double down, and that's where that idea came from. The other thing that I thought about pretty hard for a little while was purchasing an aftermarket fence set up like a Biesmeyer 52-inch fence. And there were a few issues with this, but ultimately this was the idea that led me to the second table saw. So one thing about the bigger fence setup is that it's permanently attached to the table saw station. So there's 2 big 6-foot rails, and they stick out about 52 inches to the right of the saw. And I pull my cars in here to do oil changes and different things. And that was going to mean that anytime that I needed to do that, I was going to have to push the whole table saw station out of the way. Not a deal breaker because it's on wheels. It just doesn't roll very well. And what ended up leading me to the second table saw was that that fence setup was going to cost about $500. And I kept thinking that I could purchase a whole portable job site style saw for about the same amount of money. And that's when it hit me. That's what I should do. I should just buy a second table saw, put it to the right of the first one, and then I can use the fence on that second table saw to pick up all my bigger cuts. So originally I wanted to get another 744, at least I thought I did, but they didn't make the 744 anymore. And the 745 was the replacement, I suppose. And it was my understanding that the 745 did not hold a dado stack. And I didn't really want to buy a saw that just held a single blade. I wanted to be able to put a dado stack in it, that way I could get more use out of it. And it wasn't like I was just using that saw for the fence. So it was around the same time that they came out with some new models, and one of them was the 7491, which was the saw that I ended up getting. It's perfect for doubling down because there are 3 different places you can position the fence, and that allowed me to align the middle position with the dado stack and the left and right positions with the blade on the main saw. So I suppose in a perfect world, the 2 saws would be parallel, but it's pretty easy to align the fences. It's just a couple of bolts. But it does take some trial and error to finally get it dialed in so that it's perfectly parallel with the first blade. But that's how it works. Basically, I have a 25-inch cut capacity on my 744, and then I pop the fence off, and I have from 24 7/8 all the way out to 82 inches with the second saw. So now that I have verbally explained it, I'm going to show you how I go about setting the fence up, along with some of the other cool features on my table saw station. So the first thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is the over the blade or over the top dust extraction. I call it O.T.T. I'm not going to get really in depth into it because it deserves its own video, and this video is already going to be long enough. But it's most similar, I would say, to overarm dust extraction, which I'm not really all that familiar with, but that's got like an arm out here that I'm sure would get in the way. This doesn't get in the way. So it just goes straight up to the ceiling and then over to another little vacuum cleaner. And it's all automatic. It comes on with the auto vac switch with the other vacuum cleaner. So it's effortless. It works perfectly. And basically, no matter what kind of dust collection you have hooked up to your table saw, there's still going to be a small percentage, maybe 5 or 10%, that comes straight off the blade and straight into your face. So if you're not wearing a mask, you probably need some sort of over the top dust extraction or some sort of dust extraction, or you're going to have to wear a mask. Now, at my friend Greg's shop, they don't have any kind of over the top dust extraction, so I wear a mask there. And I'd like to put something on his saw, but it might be a hard sell because there's a lot of different people that use that saw, and you can't really see the blade with this. I mean, it'd be better if this portion was clear, but the truth is, other than knowing how high the blade is set, you shouldn't be looking at the blade anyway. I mean, you need to make sure that the blade is set low enough, because the most dangerous thing you can do on the table saw is be cutting thin material and have the blade up too high. And there, we cut a lot of cardboard because we put cardboard on the inside of the face frames before they go to paint. And cardboard is one of the most dangerous things that you can cut on the table saw. And really anything thin, 1/4-inch plywood is also pretty dangerous, but cardboard, because sometimes the edges are not crisp. Like this is a nice flat edge, but this edge, if the edge of the cardboard looked like that, it can slide up underneath the fence. And as soon as it slides up underneath the fence, it binds on the blade and kicks back. So you always want to be paying attention to the material, to the fence. If you're over here looking at the blade, you are looking in the wrong place. You need to make sure that your hands are away from the blade. I like to make sure that my hands are actually away from the entire insert, but I'm only aware of where my hands are because I'm looking over here. If you're looking here, then when something bad starts to happen there, it may be too late, because, you know, if you see it starting to happen bad, you can either correct it or just get out of the way. But if you're looking here, then you may not be aware that something bad is about to happen, and then something bad happens and you're just like, what happened? This fence system also is awesome. The DeWalt fence system, the rack and pinion on their portable saws, I feel like it's the best fence system on any portable saw. It's very accurate, very repeatable, and it's what I would consider high production rock and lock, meaning when anything that's within the capacity of the fence on a saw is going to be something where you can just rock it and lock it, and you don't really have to turn the saw off, which means it's high production. Now, the thing about the extra saw is that you have to wait for the blade to stop in order to set up for the following cut. So it's definitely more of a low production thing. It doesn't take but about 15 or 20 seconds to do it, but if you're doing hundreds of cuts, it's going to slow things down. So like I said, this has a 25-inch cut capacity, and then after that, I have to take this fence off. And in order to pick up from 25 to 27, this has to come all the way over to the stop there. The fence, right now it's set on the middle position, which, like I mentioned, was this middle position is lined up to the dado. I don't know. I can't tell if I'm in frame or not. I'm half blind. So then I would pop this off and put it over in the first position. And in order to catch the first couple inches, I have to flip this little flip down material support thing down. And from here, by the way, in order to set the saw up, I use a 10-inch stick, and it's painted red so I don't lose it. And basically a 10-inch stick is something, I'm going to make a video about 10-inch sticks as well, because 10-inch sticks come in very handy for all sorts of different things with carpentry. But with the table saw setup, you want to take the 10-inch stick and set it against the teeth, not against the flat part of the blade, or it'll be off a little bit. It goes against the teeth, and then you throw your tape out. Where's my tape? And then you have to always remember to add 10 inches, or your number is going to be 10 inches off. So my first, like I had said there, the first couple inches, I have to use this flip down because the fence doesn't go far enough. And the only reason that's the case is because this stop here is there because of the way the saw used to be set up when I used to slide it. So I could have shortened that platform and then I wouldn't have to use that flip down, but it is what it is. It's a little bit of a pain because there's really not any support here. It doesn't really need it though, because if you're cutting a piece here, it's going to be 27 inches wide, or 25 to 27. But anyway, that flip down has to happen. And this first portion here, I'm able to pick up my 24 7/8 over to about 27. And then I can flip this thing up and then I can just hit the fence. But the reason that you want to use a 10-inch stick rather than just putting your tape out there is because usually this thing is all the way down, and it's, first of all, it's hard to see that. And the other thing is you're likely to nick your tape and wreck it. So 10-inch stick is the way to go. You just have to remember that you gotta add your 10 inches to your number. So here my tape is reading 17, which is actually 27. And then in this first position, I can get from 24 7/8 all the way out to 51 7/8. And then the saw itself moves. I can come out all the way to here, out to 62 1/4, roughly. And that's in the first position. So with the saw in the left position, I'm already more than your typical Biesmeyer style fence. And then from there, I can flip the fence to the right side, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this all the way back. So now I can put the fence over here on the right. And there's quite a bit of overlap from the left and right. In the middle there, I've got a lot of overlapping numbers. But with the fence on the right pushed all the way over, the saw pushed all the way over, I'm going to start off here. So 46 5/8. And then this goes out, and of course once you get out here, flip that down for support. And then with the fence all the way out, I'm at roughly 71 5/8. And then I can still pull the saw out. I got another roughly a foot here, and that gets me out to my 82 inches. So it's awesome. I mean, it does take a little bit of extra time. You do have to remember to put your 10 inches, otherwise your measurement's going to be off by 10 inches. But that's how it works. This platform is what is going to dictate, you know, how far you can go. I mean, if the platform went out farther, then, you know, I could keep on going out here and go to 96 inches if I wanted to. But this just happens to be where mine is. And 82 inches is plenty. So the platform itself needs to be unfinished plywood. This does not need to be slick because you need friction. And the saw itself, when I first started doing this, I had a Craig Automax clamp that I was putting in here because I was a little bit leery that this thing might move out of the track somehow. but it's not necessary. It's never happened. But this thing just sits in here between those two rails. This is set up for doing drawer boxes, drawer bottoms. And when I do use the dado saw, it's not connected to the same dust collection. I bring the dust collection cart over here and I hook that up to the dust collection cart. But underneath the table here is a 6 horsepower vacuum cleaner, shop vac. And then there's a cyclone that sits on a big container. So that plus over here, there's a vacuum cleaner up there that is hooked to the O.T.T, which, like I said, I'll make an entire video about that. That is the gist of the saw. Underneath, down here, there's all my zero clearance inserts. There's already a video on my channel where I made all those. The over-the-top dust extraction somewhat requires these push sticks. This is my pushy sticks, I call them. It's a push stick system that works really well with the O.T.T. And it's kind of important because if you don't use those push sticks, you might have some trouble as far as like getting stuff in there between this and the fence, especially when you have real tight cuts. This is my scrap bin. This is a brush that I use whenever I make a mess on top of the table saw. Usually that happens when I cut a skosh, and I'll just show you what I'm talking about. Where are you going? She's out of here. I'll go ahead and make a cut and show you how well the over-the-top dust extraction works. And then I'll make a cut where I'm just taking a fuzz or a skosh off. As long as there's a little bit of material to the left of the blade, then the over-the-top dust extraction works perfectly. But if you're just cutting a skosh, it shoots the chips and dust out like this direction, and it ends up going all over the table. And that is why I have that little brush there. So it picked everything up, you know, works perfectly, but I am just going to cut the tiniest little bit off and you'll see what I mean about a skosh. And if you do several cuts like that, it ends up making a big mess, and that's why I've got this brush here. There's also a big hole underneath the table saw, and there's also some landscape fabric that I've taped, making sort of like a tube that goes down, because there's quite a bit of dust. Even though most of the dust gets picked up from the vacuum cleaner that's underneath the table, a lot of it falls straight down. And it used to fall, you know, in a wide area, but because of that landscaping fabric, it just falls straight down into the scrap bin. And I guess I could show you that. There's the hole. There's landscaping fabric taped in there with zip tape, and it just creates this channel so that the dust falls straight down into that hole. And that was another thing that didn't work when I slid the saw. But yeah. yeah. Because you're throwing your tape out there, sometimes 82 inches, it's kind of important to have a tape that has a decent standout. Not like a Fat Max or anything, but you know, a decent standout. And I used to prefer these Milwaukee tapes, but this one's kind of worn out. And the last time I went to buy one, it wasn't like this. It's just got the 16ths on there. And for some reason, the new ones, they were like this tape where they have the 30 seconds on there on the first 12 inches. And I hate that. I don't read tapes in 30 seconds. I go a heavy 16th or a light 16th. So it's not that I don't understand 30 seconds, but I don't read my tapes that way. So if you know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments if you're, 30-second deficient, but it could just be me. I don't know. So the table itself here, when I first built my garage, I built 3 carts. And when I started to put this thing together, I just screwed 2 of the carts together. So these 2 carts are just screwed together like a backwards L. And the other cart is over there on the drill press station. I'll make an entire video about that because it's pretty awesome. But here, these 2 carts were screwed together, and then in the middle, there's this, which is kind of like a number 2, I guess. And it's just hollow underneath. There's like a little 2-inch support that goes around this. But then underneath here, that's where the vacuum cleaner sits, and then the cyclone container. And it just so happened to work out perfectly that the distance to the back side here, I can't really remember right at the moment. Yeah, it's 52.5 from the back of the blade to the back of the table. This happens to be what I call the perfect number. It just happened to work out. So the reason I call that the perfect distance is because if I'm cutting long rips, like on a sheet, and I'm gonna pull a couple of sheets out here, a couple of pieces just to show you what I'm talking about. So let's say that I'm cutting a full sheet in half, or any variation of a full length rip. That number down there, 52.5, it makes it to where as soon as you get just beyond the blade, that the 2 pieces start to lift off the table. And that's really convenient because that means your cut piece goes over there, and then this piece can get recut or whatever. And it's a lot better than if your table keeps going out further than 52.5, then these long rips sit there and you really have to walk around the table, or you're gonna have to try to pick it up, over the blade. So with it teetering like that, it makes it to where it's just a lot easier to grab the piece. That's why I like that number, 52.5. So write that down. That's just a preference of mine. Maybe you have a different preference. I don't know. Another thing that I didn't really mention too much. So even if you have a 52-inch fence, if you have a cut that is over 52 inches, you're going to have to do what I call a drop cut, which means you're actually going to cut the piece that would normally be the drop if it was within the capacity of the saw. And this means that you're going to have to cut the other side. So as an example, let's say that I needed to make a 64-inch cut or a 75-inch cut or something like that. And I was at my friend Greg's shop on one of the saw stops. Those saws have an 1/8 inch kerf on the blade. So I would measure 64 inches. Then I'd make a mark, and then I would make a mark at 64 1/8. And then I would measure from the other side of the sheet over to that second mark, and I would cut that shorter part. And the drop is my piece. And the thing about doing a drop cut is you only have one chance to get it. So if you cut it a little bit too long, obviously if you cut it too short, it's not going to work. But if you cut it too long, you can't recut it because you've got to have at least, a 1/2 inch or so. Once you start really getting too tight between the blade and the piece there, you can't recut it. So you got to have at least 1 inch really to make a safe drop cut. So basically that means that a lot of times you have to keep your factory edge. And I like to cut all the factory edges off when I can, but that's how you do it. Drop cut. So if you've got anything over the 52 inches, you got to do a drop cut. And I'll probably show you a little example of that. I'm going to make a 64 because this fence only goes to about 53. So I would mark 64 and then 64 and an eighth, and then measure back 19 and a heavy 13. Okay, so this is another thing. This is my outfeed table. I call it the multi-use outfeed table. And that's because I've taken this to the job before. Sometimes if I need a little work surface or whatever, it's pretty light and I just flip it onto the top of my ladder rack and away I go. So this was the spoils from a countertop shop. For a very short, brief period, I worked at a countertop place. I actually went there to try to get some countertops. And the guy was like, hey, I could use a guy like you. And yeah, I got suckered into that. But they used to have, he had a big pile of old countertops. And this was one. And this extra distance on the outside here on the back of the outfeed table isn't something I would have come up with, I don't think, on my own. It's just under 3 feet. And it's really nice because I can still cross-cut full sheets or rip full sheets in half as long as my material sits over here a little bit. And this area is out of the way. So I can still utilize the table saw and have a bunch of base sides or whatever sitting here. And it's really helpful. So this is kind of nice. And like I said, it's something I probably wouldn't have come up with if I had just designed it. So it's another one of those planetary alignment type things, kind of like that number on the back side of the table saw or the saw blade, where the material teeters like that. So those are two just awesome things that just happen to happen. And the table itself, the top is kind of heavy because, you know, it's like particle board and then Formica, but the legs are fairly light because they're just tubes made of 3/8 rough sawn plywood. And then in the bottom of the tube, there's a plug that the caster is on. The floor in here is not really that level. I've got a lot of good ideas, but I also have a lot of bad ideas. And one of the bad ideas I had was to have the floor in here kind of slope out towards the door when I had the concrete poured. And it was a really bad idea. But anyway, anytime I try to get something on the same plane in here, it's tough because it really slopes out, especially right there. So when I put this thing together, it was really easy to put those plugs that had the casters on them into the bottom of the tubes there, and then tap this thing down until it was all on the same plane. So awesome outfeed table. Also, it's pretty easy to connect and disconnect it. I'll go ahead and show you that real quick. In order to disconnect it, right here, there's a little piece of wood that has 2 dowels, and that's what locks it in. And then right here, just a short piece of wood here where it's kind of got like a little ledge that it locks on. So in order to take it off, you just lift up and push it out like that, and it's disconnected. But in order to put it back together, you just have to push it on there to make sure the dowels are pushed down, and you just push it on there until it clicks. And then there's a piece of tape right here that lets me know that it's aligned. And once I got that tape lined up, then I can reach under here and push the dowels up in there. And that locks it on there. Now, it's not on there super tight. If I wanted to, I could knock it off of there, you know, but it just needs to be locked on there tight enough to where my sheets, you know, work out and have support. So there's a 6 horsepower vacuum and then my cyclone container. It's just sitting on an old vacuum container and it's just got a piece of 3/8 plywood and the cyclone sits on that. And there's really just one auto vac switch, and it's hooked up to both that vacuum cleaner up there for the O.T.T, and it's hooked up to the vacuum cleaner here. And like I said, when I run the dado saw, it gets hooked up to that dust collection cart over there. So I just roll that thing around here and hook it up to this one. So we'll go ahead and hook everything back together. Over here, I've got a little ledge that is for the track saw. If I need to take a piece of face frame material and recut it or something, I do it here. So it's sort of a straightening ledge for the track saw. And then right here, I've got two drawers. This is my sandpaper drawer. I'm a bit of a sandpaper hoarder. That and Volkswagens. For some reason, I can't seem to get rid of them. And then here is just a drawer with some table saw accessories, some more of the dado, some router bits, hot glue gun, etc. Down there is just a bunch of tools. Who knows? Just random tools. And then the back here, I've got a little ledge right here that I use for doing work on my shelf fronts. I'll clamp the shelf front on there, and sometimes I'll route a little round over on the shelf fronts. And then I've got some live tools. Jigsaw, this is where the jigsaw lives. It's always live. Track saw lives down there. There's a little shelf here for the sander. Sometimes when I have a lot of sanding going on the backside, the sander will live there. Otherwise, the sander lives back here, and it just hangs on the dust collection cart. I'll make a whole video about the dust collection cart. It's awesome. And there's all sorts of other tools, you know, just down and around. And that used to be the vacuum cleaner for the sander, but I have stopped really using that so much, and I just pretty much use the dust collection cart. And yeah, there's like a power strip there. That's what everything's plugged into. And here, this is the power. So there's like 3 lines here. That's basically everything. So that's the saw and everything else. And if sometimes, especially when the compressor's on in here, it's all on the same circuit back here. So if I've got the table saw running, the compressor, and that other vacuum, well, I didn't show you the other vacuum, but I've got a little vacuum over here that this little vacuum here is what I use to just do general cleanup in the shop. And it lives right here. This is the small nozzle. This is the floor sweep nozzle. And if I'm running the vacuum cleaner, the table saw, and the compressor comes on, sometimes it'll kick the circuit and it'll shut me down. So anyway, that's another thing that I wasn't sure about. If when I bought, that's something I need to explain. So the saw, this 7491, I bought this, I believe I got it from Acme Tools. It was either Acme Tool or Tool Nut, one of those companies. And this was back when there was no tax on out-of-state stuff with e-commerce. So I got these saws on sale. I got 2 of them. And I got 2 of them because at some point I thought that the 744 was going to die. I've had this saw for 20 years. I've had the bearings replaced twice. And surely at some point it's going to die, but it just hasn't. And when I bought this one, I got it on sale for $480. And it also came with a rolling stand and all that stuff, which I sold. And after I sold that, I also sold, it had this like blade guard thing with a dust extraction on it. I sold that. I got like $150 or $160 for that stuff. So take that off of the $480. I got a deal. And I did. So after I got the first one, I immediately went and bought another one because I thought at some point that one's going to die. And the plan was to replace the 744 with one of these. The thing is, I actually prefer the 744 over the 7491 as my everyday saw because it's so much quieter. This saw is so noisy. I feel like I have to have ear protection when I run this saw. And it's no big deal when I run the dado because that's loud too. But just as an everyday saw, this saw is so much more peaceful than the 7491. So, and another thing that would be nice is if this saw had a soft start. When this saw comes on, it's just like, it's a jolt. It's like a lightning bolt. And sometimes it'll tear out the zero clearance insert a little bit just because of it comes on like it's awful. But I like it. It's got a lot of power. It's a beast though. It's heavy. That's another thing is that even though I've got two of these, I rarely ever use the other one. If I need to take one of these to the job or whatever, I still take the 744. It's a little bit of a pain to pop out of here, but I'll pop it out of there and take it just because this one's hard to carry around. I mean, it's a beast. If and when I do replace the 744 with a 7491, there are some differences in the two saws. The 744 has a 13 amp motor that runs at 3650 RPMs versus the 15 amp motor that runs at 4800 RPMs on this saw. And the RPMs probably isn't going to be an issue. I have heard people say that running a thinner blade on their saw causes the blade to get hot and wander. I've never had that issue on the 744, but I haven't really run one of these long enough to find out if that's an issue. The amperage at the moment, there's 13 amps on that saw. There's 11 amps running on the big vacuum cleaner under the table, and then 7.2 amps running on that vacuum up there. So when all three of those are on, I'm already pushing the limits of my 30 amp circuit. So that's the thing I don't know about this saw. It could start to trip the circuit. So if that is what happens, the easiest fix would probably be to replace the big vacuum cleaner with a slightly smaller one under the table. I did make a couple of modifications on the 7491. One thing I did was extend the lock for the fence. For some reason, the lock on the fence is really tucked up underneath here. And I found that really hard to get to sometimes. So basically I've just got a block of wood with this little piece of metal and it's just taped on there. This makes locking the fence on this saw a whole lot easier, especially when I have to reach as far as I sometimes do. Another little modification I made was just taping this area right here because there's a gap and it would leak dust out there. And that's pretty much it. I have a 12-foot garage door and there's barely enough room there to get a car in here. I mean, there really isn't, unless it's a little car. So you saw how easy it was to pop that off. So I popped this off and then I have to take the dado saw off. It's really easy to do. All it is that holds it on here are 3 screws. So I've got 3 screws here, and then these 2 dowels index where it goes. So if you just use the screws, it'll be out of alignment a little bit. Your cuts will be just slightly out of square because there's too much play. So that's why these dowels are here. So these come out, and then these 3 screws, and then there's one more screw. This little ledge here on the front is for my infeed table, which is fairly new. So there's those 3 screws, and then there's one more screw. And now this thing is free. Whenever I do need to do an oil change or whatever, I just pop this off and get this out of the way. And of course, I also have to remove the outfeed table. So this kind of gave you an idea of what used to be there. The outfeed table wasn't here, and this was the original setup. So I had the O.T.T. and this was the distance. I didn't really have any more than that to slide. And this has a little dowel as well, so that stays put. There used to be another spot right here where indexed for my base cabinets that came off of that weird fixed fence over there on the one side. And now I keep that little funky tool in there because every once in a while, if I change the blade on that saw, I'll drop the nut in there and I use that little funky tool to grab the nut. So I don't know what else I would use that for. I mean, sometimes I guess if you're working on a car, that comes in handy too, but that's the tool I use when I drop the nut, because whenever I change the blade on that thing, I drop the nut down all the time. So again, it's sort of a hodgepodge, everything here. As you can see, that cart is, you know, it's just, it is what it is. So anyway, I roll this thing back over here and I'll go ahead and hook it back up. Just roll it up on here and then drop the two dowels in and then screw the screws back together. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you is the infeed table. Whoops. Which is over there. The reason for the infeed table was sometimes when I cut full sheets lengthwise, split down the middle or whatever, I'll do the shuffle, which means I'll be walking along here and I'll do that. And that makes it to where my cut's no longer perfect because, you know, the sheet comes off the fence just a little bit. And in order to keep that from happening, I use this infeed table, which makes it to where rather than having to support the sheet and feed it, all I have to do is feed it. And it locks onto this little lip on the front here. It's super easy to hook up, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. On the front here, this is the lip that it locks onto, and on the front of this, it's got a corresponding lip. I might not be able to, right now I've got that, my assembly table. It's a little tight right now because this table, I need to push it out of the way. This thing just pushes onto that lip and locks on like so. Oh. Actually, it won't lock on because of this thing right here. I have to move that just a little bit. That's the lock for the bevel on that saw. It hits that bevel lock. But this pushes on there like this, and then it slides like that. And then whenever you get it where you want it, which usually the reason it's here is so that I can do those long rips. And it's most useful to sit right there as far this way as possible. Say I need to do, you know, a half sheet or whatever. I've got all the support I need here, and all I have to do is just push the sheet through. Super easy. And there's a little thumb screw there. I actually made a video about these thumb screws because they're awesome. But this thumb screw is what locks it to the track there. And that way it's on there, it doesn't go anywhere. And then if I want to move it, I just loosen that thumb screw up and it slides. It needs to be loosened up so that it can slide. Now all that's made of wood. So I do have to be really careful because it wouldn't take very much to make it, you know, crack off of there. See, it's all just made of wood. So that is everything hooked up. That's the infeed table hooked up, the outfeed table hooked up, and that's going to pretty much wrap up my amazing table saw setup. I hope you enjoyed it. If you got any comments or questions, leave them down in the comments. You know, if you want to subscribe, you can. If you like this video, come back, because I've got at least 43 more videos to make, and most of them are just stuck up here. I got to shake them out. I finally got this one shook out. Sorry it took me so long to get this one out, but it is what it is. I don't know. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but yeah, hit the like button, you know, share it. Share it with somebody. Let somebody else know. Hopefully this video gets 1 million or a zillion views. And yeah, I'm going to make more. So come on back. I'll see you on the next one.